Thank you very much, Professor John. I'm going to talk mainly about the U.S.-ROK alliance and its role in these negotiations. Exactly 1 year ago, Donald Trump met with his senior national security advisors. This was the last of many arguments he had with them about the value of alliances, and he asked rhetorically at one point, what do we get by maintaining a massive military presence on the Korean Peninsula? And I would underline the word get. He's thinking about benefits. And this point of view should not be a surprise. Mr. Trump formed his beliefs on U.S. external policy over 30 years ago. They were outside of the mainstream then. They're outside the mainstream now. He apparently still believes that our closest allies and partners are cheating America on trade and free riding on security commitment. Fortunately, the President's national security team understands that alliances and forward deployments contribute to the U.S. national security strategy, but President Trump remains a wild card. Now, even when allies agree on the threat that an adversary state poses to their joint security, as we have with North Korea, building adequate deterrence is hard work, but I think we have done that hard work. At the same time, we should not automatically assume that North Korea will forever have evil intentions towards the ROK. At least hypothetically, we should remain open to the possibility that leaders in Pyongyang might conclude that Seoul and Washington together have won, and that they need to change their hostile policy. It's a little hard to imagine at times, but we can't rule it out. So, our alliance must be prepared to win the peace, if peace is possible, just as it has learned to deter war. It must be prepared to pivot for peace. It must do this with skill, because taking risk for peace is sometimes more difficult than deterring war. It requires a common and clear view of the adversary's intentions, a shared strategy for defining and deploying concessions needed to induce concessions by the other side. But it's a lot harder for our alliance to pivot to peace when the President of the United States has his own peculiar views of the value of our alliance and how to set the terms for peace. This isn't the first time that the United States and others have seen merit in testing North Korea's willingness to change its capabilities and intentions. There was the agreed framework, the six-party talks, Barack Obama's sanctions-based approach, and we understand the logic of these approaches. Unfortunately, they did not succeed. There was a variation in how much Washington and Seoul were aligned in their approach, but that wasn't the major reason, or the lack of alignment wasn't the main reason for failure. Now, I think President Moon has been systematic and dedicated in his effort to create a more peaceful Korean Peninsula. His path towards peace has a clear logic. That is, North Korea truly believes that the United States is an existential threat for which nuclear weapons and ICBMs are the only effective deterrent. President Moon believes that starting with a formal peace treaty and promoting good inter-Korean relations and economic growth in the North, over time will moderate its hostile behavior. Denuclearization would be nice to have, but what makes those capabilities dangerous is not their mere existence, but Pyongyang's profound insecurity and the reckless ways it seeks to mitigate its insecurity. This is the logic of the Moon administration, I think. But the conclusion is that making peace now will create the best basis for denuclearization later. Now, I don't happen to agree with this logic. I fear that deferring denuclearization towards a later time will ensure that it never happens. But President Moon's approach has the value of being coherent, unlike President Trump's approach. President Trump's approach is in the same general conceptual ballpark as President Moon, but he's driven more by the show and the performance and by boosting his ego than he is driven by a desire to set goals and define a path to reach them. President Trump's approach has another serious flaw, and that is the division between himself and his national security team over key issues like North Korean intentions, the value of summits, and so on. The national security team has been united in its pessimism about where North Korea would like to go, and it believes that Trump camp summits hurt U.S. interests. My impression is that President Moon's administration is more united behind his policy approach. There may be tactical tensions and differences, but that's not surprising. And this relative possible unity here gives President Moon considerable freedom of action to lead the ROK where he wants to take it. There is a potential problem that I see, and that is the Trump National Security Team's view of ROK policy. Reportedly, people in the administration have been afraid that Seoul will press ahead with engagement with the North, not pay sufficient attention to U.S. interests, and leave the issue of denuclearization for Washington to handle directly with Pyongyang. This may have made it more difficult for the alliance to operate as an alliance to craft a common approach to negotiating with North Korea because of the differences in approach within the Trump administration and between it and the Moon administration. A key issue, as we all understand, is sanctions on North Korea and whether to lift them and when to lift them. In November, Seoul and Washington created a process mechanism, the U.S. ROK Working Group, to facilitate the fine-tuning of our diplomacy. The working group met for the first time on November 20th. This procedural mechanism may be useful in aligning the U.S. and ROK positions, but ROK officials appear to believe that Washington is taking the wrong approach by insisting that sanctions relief will come much later rather than sooner. Some might say that Washington and Seoul are pursuing different goals. It's probably more accurate to say that both have the same list of objectives, but each ranks these goals in different ways. Complicating matters, President Trump and his advisors have their own different rankings of priorities. And these differences make it difficult to craft a common negotiating approach with the ROK towards Pyongyang. I think it's also worth pointing out that we can throw around terms like denuclearization and peace in a general way, but these are actually very complicated packages of policy problems. A serious denuclearization effort would have to address the following: North Korea's plutonium program in its totality, the uranium enrichment program in its totality, thermonuclear materials production program, nuclear weapons themselves and the associated delivery systems, nuclear weaponization, nuclear WMD and missile proliferation activities, and North Korea's illicit nuclear and missile trade and smuggling networks. Each of these areas involves a mass of information that we do not yet have. Some of these tasks involve facilities that the United States, the ROK, and others suspect to exist or know to exist, but whose location is not completely clear. Effective verification of DPRK steps will be mandatory. What is clear is that a serious denuclearization effort will take a long time, probably over a decade. The peace accord might not be quite as daunting as that, but it will require a lot of work and a lot of time. We need to distinguish between three elements: peace accord, peace treaty, peace regime, and again, there are several issues that have to be addressed. How does these different stages relate to each other in terms of substance and sequence? How do they relate to denuclearization? What are the implications of each stage for key elements of the current war prevention regime, the armistice, UN command, U.S. forces in Korea, and so on? For each stage, which parties are signatories, and so on. In short, there are a lot of complex issues that would have to be addressed for both denuclearization and a peace treaty or peace accord. Even in an environment of general trust, reaching consensus with Pyongyang on all of these will be difficult. Quick solutions are unlikely. I certainly hope that Seoul and Washington have done a lot of work already to prepare for negotiating on these issues. But I think there's actually a more basic problem that we need to address. I think that the policy complexity that I've described reflects a problem that's more fundamental than the mismatch between the Trump and Moon administrations. Simply put, I think that the deal that the ROK, the United States, and others have offered at Pyongyang over the years objectively has always been a bad deal for North Korea. In successive negotiations, our side has called on North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons and programs in a verifiable way in return for security guarantees, economic benefits, and other things. But think about the trade-off involved here. We've asked North Korea to give up its capabilities that it believes are the best assurance of its security in return for a change in our intentions. We have demanded that the end of North Korea's nuclear capabilities be irreversible, but we need to realize that a change in intentions can be easily reversed. So there's an asymmetry here. And the only reason, there are two reasons why I think that Pyongyang would accept such an asymmetric deal. One is that it truly trusts the United States and the ROK, which it does not. What confidence can Pyongyang have in a U.S. commitment after President Trump's withdrawal from the Iran nuclear agreement, for example? The second reason that Pyongyang might go in this direction is if it can persuade the United States and the ROK to reduce or eliminate our own capabilities to create a more symmetric balance of insecurity, which is actually what North Korea is demanding. So in my pessimistic view, basing our policy on the assumption that North Korea would really denuclearize in a serious way, either now or later or much later, is probably flawed from the outset. For a long time, we have pretended or hoped that a mutually acceptable negotiated outcome is possible. My personal assessment is that North Korea might change its behavior for a while, based on the process that's begun, but that it will not give up its nuclear capabilities or its revisionist intentions. Consequently, we really face just two options. One is containment and the other appeasement. A unilateral U.S. military option doesn't exist, I think. And please note, by the way, that I'm not using the word appeasement in a derogatory way. Sometimes appeasement is the only reasonable strategy available to a country facing a strong and reckless adversary. I would say that the Trump national security team is already pursuing a kind of containment, while South Korea and Donald Trump are already pursuing different versions of appeasement. Each approach has its limitations. Containment, I think, will only work if it includes China, but China is kind of moving to the appeasement camp. Appeasement will only work if it induces the adversary to exercise restraint and moderate its intentions on a long-term basis. And we can discuss whether North Korea is willing to do that. I really hope I'm wrong in this pessimistic assessment. I actually hope that President Moon is correct in his assumptions, his approach, and expectations. At this point, however, I believe that what drives North Korea is not insecurity, as it has tried to lead us to believe, but long-time unsatisfied greed. Hence, peace without denuclearization will be anything but peaceful. In the meantime, however, the divisions within the Trump administration and between it and the Moon administration severely handicap us in negotiating with Pyongyang. Thank you.